Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to my chapter-by-chapter read-along of J.R.R. Tolkien's masterpiece, The Lord of the Rings. There's the One Ring right there. I started with The Two Towers, and then moved on to The Return of the King. Now I've come around to finish up with The Fellowship of the Ring. And we are following our cast of characters, the titular Fellowship of the Ring, intact, squabbling, but intact. We have the whole of our crew that set out from Rivendell in order to deal with the One Ring, which is in the possession of a hobbit named Frodo. Frodo is accompanied by his servant Sam and two other hobbits, Merry and Pippin. But the rest of the Fellowship fills out. There's the wizard Gandalf, who knows all about this and is taking Frodo as far as he needs to go. Their mission is to go to Mordor, the stronghold of the Dark Lord Sauron, and throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom and destroy it. A hopeless mission, but they see no other right course to take. Gandalf is along. Aragorn is along, the ranger Strider, who is far more intimately connected to these things than at first appears. Boromir, a proud man of the southern kingdom of Gondor, the foremost bulwark militarily against the might of Sauron, has come along. He came to Rivendell to get some answers and has joined the Fellowship. And there are also representatives of the elves and the dwarfs. Legolas, a young elf of the woodland realm, and Gimli, the son of Glóin, one of the dwarfs from J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. So that's our Fellowship. Plus, Bill the pony. They need a pack animal, I guess. They need a pack animal. So they bring Bill the pony. And Sam, Frodo's servant, becomes extremely attached to Bill. He's a good-natured, humble little creature who helps them a lot in the initial stages of their journey. But things are getting worse and worse. And we're now up to the chapter called A Journey in the Dark, and our characters have been thwarted. They mean to take the ring south. They mean to take it as far south as Gondor, at first. Gondor is directly across from Mordor. That'll be a good stopping point, a good way station. Boromir's going that way anyway, and so is Aragorn. So they mean to take the ring south, and that presents problems of its own if you're starting out from Rivendell, because you've got the mountains in between you. And they can't take the up mountain pass because it's too far away. Gandalf says in this chapter they'd be a year going that route. It would add a long time to their journey, under the watchful eyes of the enemy the whole time. And they can't go to the southern pass, the Gap of Rohan, because the Gap of Rohan is right next to Orthanc, the stronghold of Saruman the White, one of Gandalf's fellow wizards, who Gandalf has just revealed in the Council of Elrond is playing a game of his own, and very much wants the ring. He has turned Orthanc from a green paradise into a smoke-choked industrial base, and is more than likely building an army, and has spies everywhere. Animals, semi-animals, all sorts of things. So, although Boromir thinks that making for the Gap of Rohan, once they can't get over the mountains, snow stops them from getting over the mountain pass. Boromir thinks that making for the Gap of Rohan is a great idea, and once again, for like the 50th time, Gandalf or somebody, whether it's Aragorn or Gandalf, has to remind Boromir of something that he's already heard. He's not all that bright. We're once again reminded of how different this book would be if his brother Faramir were part of the Fellowship instead of Boromir. Boromir once again has to be reminded that they can't bring the ring anywhere near Isengard. That would be folly. It wouldn't mean that Sauron would get the One Ring, which is the thing they're all dreading, but it would mean that Saruman would get the One Ring, which isn't any better. So, since they can't go up mountain, and they can't go down mountain, and they can't go over the mountain, the only alternative is, there are two. One is discussed at the beginning of this chapter, which is to simply return to Rivendell. In defeat. In shame. And it's pointed out, when that subject comes up in this chapter, it's pointed out that that would be the last return. There would be no way for them to start out again, which means soon Rivendell would be besieged and then fall. No way around that. I think that's a reference to the fact that isn't often commented on in commentaries about Fellowship of the Ring, which is that once the Council of Elrond decides that the ring must go south to Mordor, Elrond sends out forces all around, scouring the wilderness for word, but also to destroy any kinds of lurking spies or enemies. He sends his own sons out, and the Rangers, and Aragorn, and a whole bunch of other people. That happens for a long time before the Fellowship sets out. I think that's a reference. This comment is a reference to the fact that that couldn't be done a second time in anything like any amount of time. It wouldn't be possible to do a second time. So if you go back to Rivendell, you're staying in Rivendell until the end. Whereas here, there is another route. And the other route is under the mountains. It's through the mines of Moria, through the dwarf realm of Dwarodelf. Long abandoned, long in ruins. But Gandalf has been there before. He's visited Moria once before. He's been everywhere. And actually so has Aragorn, although Aragorn makes no references at all to it, and clearly doesn't know it as well as Gandalf. Gandalf is sure that he can navigate our crew to the gate of Moria, through the gate of Moria, through Moria, and out the other side to the Dimwall Dale, which means they will have been out of sight of their watching enemies for days and days and days and days, and they'll have stolen a major march on their progress to Mordor. So on paper, it's a kind of a good plan. But the name of Moria, as our characters say in this chapter, is black. It haunts even the folk stories of the hobbits. No one wants to go there. And there's a kind of a vote that takes place, kind of. Boromir, for instance, says that he will not voluntarily go to Moria unless the whole of the company votes against him. Legolas says that he doesn't want to go. The hobbits, of course, don't want to go. Aragorn says that he's willing to follow Gandalf in this path because Gandalf was willing to follow him. His was the idea to travel over the mountains, and it almost killed them. And Gandalf has not issued a word of reproach, so Aragorn will go. And Gimli, of course, wants to go to Moria. Of course he does. It's a stronghold of his people. And they're at odds until they hear the howling of wargs. They are being hunted throughout the country. The howling is a long way off, but they can hear it and they know exactly what it means. They're being hunted. It's a kind of a little bit of puckish humor on Tolkien's part that Boromir says at first, I will not go to Moria unless the vote of the whole company is against us. And when we hear the wargs howling in the distance, Boromir immediately says, how far is it to Moria? And they decide that was what they will do. They will make straight for the gate that Gandalf knows of. They get attacked in the night by wolves. And it's an awe-inspiring scene. It mystifies me why Peter Jackson didn't film it. Because not only are our heroes, do we see them... Not only do we see our heroes in action for the first time altogether, and it's pretty credible. Aragorn and Boromir, Legolas and Gimli, they are pretty formidable. It's our first real glimpse of that. But also Gandalf. It's one of his most impressive moments in this book, and it's not in the Peter Jackson movie. It's kind of a shame. He towers over these beings, seems to grow in size, has very much an effortless command of fire, and also seems to be referring to a Gandalf that the hobbits have never known. Aragorn tells the hobbits chapters and chapters ago that you don't know the real Gandalf. You know him from his toys and games, but you don't know the real person. There's far more to him than you think. And when our party is threatened by these wolves, Gandalf says, Gandalf is here. Speaks of himself in the third person, says Gandalf is here. And it's clearly meant to mean something. It's not the last time it's going to happen, either. They deal with the wolves and make their way to the gate, to the door of Moria. It's right next to a long, black, dead-looking lake that seems very unnatural. The very idea of wading or swimming in it, out of the question. The very idea of filling your water bottles from it, out of the question. Even just looking at it, they feel that way. And the door is shut. Now, the door at first isn't even visible. Gandalf has to do a little bit of wizarding to make the outlines of the door visible. And when he does, Tolkien gives us an illustration. This chapter actually has 2 illustrations in it. It might be, am I right, you Tolkien fanatics? Is it the only chapter in The Lord of the Rings that has 2 illustrations? The first illustration is the door. This is the door. That is what reveals itself in the moonlight when Gandalf, wakes it up. And it has this inscription on the bottom. That Narvi, the dwarf, made this door, and Celebrimbor of Eregion made these symbols. Gandalf translates that on the fly to Celebrimbor of Holland. He doesn't say Celebrimbor of Eregion. And the door, as you know, if you know nothing else about this part of the book, you know this. The door says, "Speak, friend, and enter." And Gandalf consults with Gimli, and Gimli says, well, the meaning is obvious. if you're a friend to the realm of Dwareldelf, then when you get to this door, if it's closed and locked, you say the password and it'll open for you. Dwarves make doors like that. They're amazing. Gandalf even says that some dwarf doors only open for a particular person. How do the doors know? Pretty interesting. So all that's necessary is for them to know the password. And suddenly it dawns on the Fellowship, well, okay, they all look at Gandalf and say, well, okay, you know the password, don't you? And Gandalf says, no, I don't know the password. And Boromir actually loses his temper and says, well, then what on earth was the point of bringing us here if you don't know the password? You said yourself you were once here. If that's true, how did you get in if you didn't know the password? This is pretty raw, pretty insulting stuff for Gandalf to take. He doesn't take that kind of commentary well. Once again, Boromir is brought up for his rudeness and ignorance. Gandalf tells him, that's 65 emergency vehicles. There are only 80 in Greater Boston, so we only have to put up with that a little while longer, in which case, God forbid you have a house fire anywhere else in Boston. Anyway, where was I? 65 sirens. Gandalf sort of snaps back at Boromir and says, don't you ever listen? I said that I came to Moria from the east. I didn't use this entrance. And also, maybe better not to comment on what use my actions are until they prove useless. In other words, why don't you sit down and shut up? I know what I'm doing and you don't. Gandalf just figures somewhere in his memory he knows every spell that's ever been. He knows every language that's ever been. It's just a lot of it is buried under years of disuse. He figures that he will be able to figure out what the opening spell is. And he tries and tries and tries, and it doesn't work. He tries all sorts of things. Eventually throws his staff on the ground in frustration. Boromir is even more frustrated. They can hear wolves in the distance. Gandalf has already made the merciless pronouncement, much to Sam's horror, that Bill the pony must be left behind. He can't be brought into Moria. There's no way. There'll be steps. There'll be ledges. He wouldn't go in anyway. They're going to have to turn him loose in the wilderness. Sam is horrified. At first he says that's a flat no. I flatly refuse. It's just murder to let him loose with wolves all around here like this. But there's no hope for it. But Bill is still with them, and Boromir makes the sarcastic comment, maybe you shouldn't turn him loose yet. It's obvious that we can't get through this door. We might need him. When suddenly it dawns on Gandalf, the truth dawns on Gandalf, which is that it's not that if you're a friend and you come to this door, you say the password and you enter. It's that the word friend is the password. Speak friend and enter. He simply says the word friend and the door opens. And they're getting ready. They see stairs going up inside. They're going inside when suddenly the lake erupts with tentacles. The bad kind. They come racing out of the dark and grab Frodo and seem to be wanting to drag him into the water. Sam has to make a choice. The appearance of these tentacles bursting out of the water panics Bill the pony, and he runs. Sam is ready to run after him. It's literally a choice. Do I go after the pony or do I save my master? And he tries to save Frodo. And eventually they get inside the doors, and the thing, whatever it is, uses 100 more tentacles to slam the doors closed, and from the inside of Moria, our heroes, the Fellowship, can now hear boulders and trees being uprooted wildly outside the door on the other side. They can distantly, muffledly hear that noise. So the thing has not only tried to reach them, Gandalf notes that it tried to grab Frodo first. Not only is it trying to grab them, but when it fails to grab them, it destroys that entrance, so they can't get out that way. Which means, as Gandalf says, the only way now is to go through. The only way now is to get out through the other end, the Dimrill Dale. So they do. They go on and on. They travel throughout Moria. It's very uneventful. They have no light except Gandalf's staff. Most of their gear was lost with Bill the pony. So they're totally reliant on Gandalf. They need him to see in the darkness of these lower depths, and they make their way through Moria, relying not only on Gandalf's staff, but on his tenuous memory. He has been in a lot of these places before, and has a better idea of how Moria is set up than even Gimli does. So they make their way, and it's a little bit more of walking around until they get to a particular chamber. They camp every once in a while, and they get to a particular chamber. They're going through all these dark, barely visible hallways and entranceways and manors and whatnot, and it looks at times like Gandalf doesn't know where he's going, like he's making it up as he goes along. Aragorn actually has to reassure the rest of the Fellowship. And it's a wonderful thing. I want to read a bit of it because of what it alludes to that we never learn. We never see any of it. He says to them, "Do not be afraid." There was a long a pause longer than usual, and Gandalf and Gimli were whispering together, and the others were crowded behind, waiting anxiously. "Do not be afraid," said Aragorn. "I have been with him on many a journey, if never one so dark, and there are tales in Rivendell of greater deeds of his than any that I have seen. He will not go astray, not if there is any path to find." I'd like to know what some of those tales are. What adventures has he had? We know about ousting the necromancer from Gol Dodur, but what about others? What about adventures long before, the centuries before then? We don't I would love to hear some of those tales. But as they're traveling through, they eventually get a little bit of refracted light from the outside world, and that helps them to see the other illustration in this chapter, which is this. It's the carving on top of a stone sarcophagus, sadly. It's the tomb of Balin, son of Fundin, a dwarf who came to Moria in order to reopen it and become its master. So he is dead. And the chapter ends very, very wonderfully. He is dead then, said Frodo. I feared it was so. And then we're told Gimli cast his hood over his face. So that is where the chapter ends. Our characters are almost all the way out of Moria. They've been traveling for a long time in Dwarodelf, in the dark, but without any opposition, without any trouble at all. The biggest pitfall has been literal. It's been random holes that they could fall into if they didn't have a ready source of light. So they can't go wandering off. They have to stay together, and they need Gandalf. Until they start to get those little slivers of refracted daylight from the outside world, once they get up into the high enough levels to get that, they need Gandalf to go around. They know that other things are in Moria with them. At one point, Pippin throws a rock down a well and waits a long time to hear it hit something. But after it's hit something, he hears little tappings. And Gimli says, that's the sound of a hammer. Or I've never heard one before. So we know that something else is alive in Moria. And also, all throughout this chapter, Frodo has been consistently haunted with the idea that he can hear soft, bare footfalls echoing them that stop right when he starts to pay attention. He's certain that he does. He's not sure what it is. He has a blade. His blade's sting glows blue if orcs are around, and it's not glowing. Of course, we the reader know, especially in retrospect, if you read this, more than once, you know that that's Gollum, who is following the Fellowship. Somehow, he is following them. Did he go up into the path of Caradhras? Did he almost get killed by the snow? Did he find a way in through this door before the lurker in the water, the watcher in the water, pulled it closed? Is there another entrance that he found his way in? Nothing is said about that now. In Peter Jackson's movie, it is known. But right now in this chapter, it's not. They know they're not alone in Moria, but they think they can see the light at literally the end of the tunnel. They think that they will make it to the Dimnall Gate. It's just before they get there, they have this incredibly sad bit of news, which is that the dwarf colony that was talked about in the Council of Elrond, and Gimli was hoping would still be here, some remnant of it would still be in Moria, that dwarf colony is gone. They were wiped out to a person, including their lord, including Balin, son of Fundin. So that's the somber note that we end this chapter on. And I want to point out something structural here. I don't need to convince any of you Tolkien fans that Tolkien knows what he's doing. But this chapter starts with a bang. It starts with the wolf attack. And the Fellowship of the Ring engaged simultaneously in combat for one of the only times that they ever are. And there's at the midpoint, there's a bang. The Watcher in the water is an unexpected thing and terrifying and exciting. And then we get this. A funereal little moment, a carved sarcophagus. And I would argue that what Tolkien is doing here is a kind of reverse cliffhanger. I would argue that this way of ending the chapter is going to make you even more eager to read the next chapter than if it had ended with a third bang. One at the beginning, one in the middle, one at the end. I think it's canny. It's well done. I was appreciating it more rereading it this time. So we're going to move on next time to a chapter that certainly needs no introduction from me. A lot of these Moria chapters have famous bits in them. We will deal with the Chamber of Mars-Arbul, the Book of Mars-Arbul, and all the rest of it, all the rest of the most dramatic entrances in this book. So we'll do that next time. This was A Journey in the Dark, and it was mostly a heightened stakes reprise of what The Lord of the Rings is infamous for, which is characters just walking around. We're not going to fault it because it's still really, really good. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, and we will move on next time. We are slowly but surely creeping towards the climax of the Fellowship of the Ring. So I will just get there together. I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.